Yeah, I think we're going now. We'll just give it a minute for everyone to turn up.
1 minute.
Yeah, everyone get seated and get ready. That's good. Everyone's coming in.
How many of these have you done, Joe?
This will be the 5th, I think.
Blimey.
So we've got 8 in total of the first round, and we want to do more as well. So it's a collaboration with our friends at the Delaware Pavilion.
That's really good. I love that building. It's beautiful, isn't it?
Yeah, it's very nice. It's great to be nearby it, and they're a great team to work with as well. So yeah. No doubt they're watching, so I hope they heard that. Okay, should we get started, and people can join us as we're getting in. So good afternoon, everybody, and thank you for attending this Talking Loud event. My name's Joe Hill, and I'm the director of Towner and Eastbourne. I'm going to go through a few sort of housekeeping things and introductory things first, and then we'll get into talking to our wonderful speaker today, who is Michael Wolff, you'll see on screen. But you'll also see on screen with us is Sue McLean, who is our British Sign Language English interpreter. And just thanks, Sue, for, again, supporting us in these events and providing that for everybody who's watching. Still be visible throughout the event and maybe taking a short break later if the session does go on longer. So Talking Loud is a series of events that are hosted jointly by Towner and Eastbourne and the Delaware Pavilion in Bexhill. It's great to be collaborating with the Delaware. We're really close geographically, and I think both institutions are working really well collaboratively. The talks aim to give you the opportunity to hear from leaders across the creative industries, and they're part of the Southeast Creatives Programme, which is developed to support small businesses and creative individuals for cultural digital sectors across East Sussex, Kent and Essex. And I'm delighted to say it's funded by the European Regional Development Fund, and sad to say that might be some of the last funding that we see from the European Union. I'd like to thank those behind Southeast Creatives, because it's been a really important programme, particularly now supporting those creative businesses in the Southeast, especially East Sussex County Council and Sally Staples, and Locate East Sussex, Philip Johnson and the team there for supporting and promoting these events. So a bit of housekeeping. Today's event will last between 45 minutes and an hour. There is live captioning available if you'd like to have captioning. It's in a button at the bottom of your screens, but do excuse any errors because the transcript is created automatically. It can be funny if you want to watch it as well, but please do excuse any automatic errors. And so you can focus on the discussion. We won't be including any online chat or questions today. We have had some pre-submitted questions, which we will get to at points through the talk. So thank you for those who submitted those. So on to our fantastic guest today, and I'm delighted to be joined by Michael Wolff. I've known Michael quite a long time, but it's brilliant to be able to sit down in this way and talk about your approach to creativity and your career, fantastic career, and you know, and how you see things going as we go forward. So just a little bit about Michael. Michael originally trained as an architect, but in 1965 co-founded Wolff Orleans, one of the biggest branding and design agencies in the world, with Wally Orleans. He's worked on legendary brands like Apple Records with the Beatles, Shell, and did create the famous Labour Rose, which I always love the fact that you did that. Michael's a senior fellow at the Royal College of Art, a former president of both the Design and Art Directors Association and Chartered Society of Designers, and recently has become an RDI, the UK's exclusive faculty for Royal Designers for industry. So amazing that you can join us, Michael, and it really is delightful to hear from you on the subjects that we're going to discuss. I think we're going to keep it fairly casual and just have a bit of a conversation and see where we go with it. But I thought I would start with a quote that you gave me when we first talked about doing this talk. And it was really funny because this whole program is designed to sort of be about people sharing experience. So to get this quote to market it was fantastic. It says, I have an open mind and a skepticism of my experience. I enjoy not knowing what to do and trusting my creativity. I always encourage people to be creative in all situations and above all, to have a sense of humor. Michael, can you talk us through that quote to start with?
Well, listen, it's great that we're starting this off by laughing.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Excellent.
So your skepticism of your own experience, I think that's a really great place to begin.
Well, yes, I wonder if it's a phrase that is accurate. It's really that I don't like my experience to guide me, to tell me that it knows what I should do. You know, I think of my experience a bit separate from me, and it's a bank of stuff that I've done and conversations that I've had and warfare battles that I've lost and won and all the rest of it. And I don't like to be informed by the past, um, because it actually freezes you from, I find it freezes my creativity. It makes me rely on a store that I can go into and find supposed solutions. And I'd rather not go into that store because I have a better faith in my imagination than in what I think I know.
And that's an amazing thing to think about. I mean, we were just talking earlier, and I was sort of saying that I'm always amazed that when you're younger, you look up at people in sort of senior positions in areas that you admire,
Yes.
and my God, they must know what they're doing. And then when you slowly sort of creep your way up to these positions, you look around at peers and you think, God, nobody knows what they're doing.
No.
And it's quite a liberating thing to feel that, isn't it? It's quite
Well, there are some people like brain surgeons who certainly have to know what they're doing. So I don't think there's much, well, I don't know. I was going to say, I don't think there's much scope for creativity in brain surgery. But if you read that book, I think it's called Do No Harm, and I can't remember the name of the surgeon who wrote it. It is called Do No Harm, and it's an astonishing book because he uses metaphors and talks about being inside somebody's brain, being in a palace, and it's extraordinary. So there's certainly scope for creativity in most expertise.
I'd hope so. I
Yeah.
remember going through art school and doing foundation, and there were lots of students that did foundation art training with me that were going on to medical school. And I always thought that was brilliant, that they wanted to be doctors or brain surgeons, you talk about, or nurses, or but there was a sort of wave, I think, at the time of being encouraged to go and do a foundation art course before you went to medical school, which I just thought was the most brilliant thing to start to get people thinking creatively about how you approach medicine and care, I suppose.
Yes, I think that's right. I mean, one of the things is you don't know yourself how you compare to other people. So I don't know to what extent I'm mad or not. But I remember, you know, being asked at school, at some terrible school that I was at, what I wanted to be when I grew up. And I must have been about 16 or something, relatively grown up. And I said I wanted to be a pilot. Now, I cannot begin to understand how I said that because I'm scared of flying. And it was just this idea of this fantasy of seeing how you might become by looking at how other people have become or imagining how you think they have become. And I think envy was quite a big part of why I decided to be or to train in architecture. Also, it was an escape, an imagined escape from hard work, because I reckon that, you know, being a lawyer or being a doctor, you really had to work. While as being an architect, it seemed to me at the time was a much less arduous thing. Of course, that's not true, but it's certainly what it struck me at the time, that being an architect would be relatively easy. It isn't.
No, I mean, hopefully if the buildings sort of stay up, that's the main thing, isn't it? When you work with architects, and they're going to kill me now for saying this, but you do realise that they put a lot of weight on the structural engineers then to actually make sure the thing actually stays up.
Oh, all that and bylaws and all sorts. I mean, it's a really complicated profession, but that's no excuse for, as you drive throughout England and you see these horrible little estates absolutely everywhere with pokey little windows and pokey little rooms, and it's called development for some reason. And oh dear, yeah, it's sorry. I'm quite cross with the architectural profession for not playing a more active part in making housing more attractive.
It's a huge, I think it's a big problem that we're facing actually, is that the idea that certain, I mean, it's a bit, well, in some ways, it's a bit like the sort of program of the terraced housing in the Victorian and Edwardian period,
Yeah.
isn't it? That actually it was builders that would buy a plan off an architect and they'd replicate the house over and over
Yeah.
again.
Yeah.
But actually, what the impetus around these is money and value engineering the materials down to the absolute minimum. And it is such a shame to think that once we've been through that process that you've been very much a part of through the 60s and 70s of coming out of that post-war period of optimism and let's design in a new way and let's think about the way people live.
Yes.
See that we've come to this,
I
these
know.
Barratt Homes estates, is so depressing. And thinking about those old council architects, you know, the borough council architects that did such amazing, ambitious things like the Barbican and other revolutionary estates around the country. To think
Well,
that now,
it's a strange thing that when you, I mean, some people will, I've no doubt disagree with me, but when you walk around a store like IKEA, it's actually quite a liberating thing because you can imagine very different ways of expressing yourself through your home than perhaps the home you're in currently. And so it's an invitation to think, well, maybe I could be like that, or maybe I could have a kitchen like this, or maybe this is how I'd like to entertain people, or this is how I'd like to sleep, or whatever it may be. It's a sort of invitation. And in a sense, you think that building a town or building even a village or whatever is an invitation to produce something that's more delightful and useful than what we seem to be getting.
Yeah, and I think those experimental practices where they combined artists and musicians and writers and architects together to make something really, really fantastic is something that's missing, I think, now. Do you feel the same way as you do about architecture, about some of the design and branding approaches that happen now as well? Do you think that's become...
I probably do. I'm just pondering, you know, as the question runs around the corridors of my mind looking for solutions. Yeah, I think there's a lot of imitation in the work that we do. You know, if we look at what other people have done and relate what we're about to do to what's been done, there's not a huge amount of creativity or innovation. There is some, but you know, it takes a Steve Jobs or it takes an Agnelli, you know, Olivetti. It takes a real bold vision to strike off in a different direction. You know, because branding, although we see it as something you look at, is actually more to do with how people behave in institutions and in companies. I always say it's not what a company looks like, it's how it behaves. And of course, how it looks is an aspect of how it behaves, but that look needs to reflect something more than some designer's idea of a look that you just buy. You need to feel that the way you look is somehow, as we all do when we get dressed, it expresses something of your nature or something of what you want to have an effect on people of some sort. So it is a deliberate thing, and when it's so predicated on imitation, on people who you think are better than you, or look better than you, or dress better than you, or whatever it may be, it's a funny constraint in a way. It stops real freedom of expression because you've already set something up as an aspiration to guide the way it's going to turn out.
I think your thoughts about a brand being everything, almost the visual identity is the secondary package. It is how it behaves. And the two companies you've mentioned, and it's probably why I've been long interested in design and branding, is I worked for both IKEA and Apple, strangely, in my youth. Yeah, they were the two companies that I sort of was drawn to growing up in West Yorkshire. When an IKEA landed in our town like a sort of UFO, I wanted to go and work at it because it had this different feeling, you know. And I ended up working there for years while I was a student. And then when I came to London at one of the Apple stores down here, and I don't tell many people that, but it's interesting that those two brands were almost cultish in how they drew you in. And that was more about the behavior than it was about any visual identity or design work around them.
And it came from somebody's vision that a lot of other people recognized themselves in and participated in, whether as being part of Apple or being an Apple customer. Doesn't really make much difference. It's a response to an energy of a human being, Steve, or two Steves, Wozniak and Jobs. And they're, one of the things that they said that most people seem to forget was to put the power of the personal computer in the hands of every individual on the planet. I mean, that their aspiration was huge. And I don't think you would have got an iPhone and the revolution that the iPhone has precipitated had that vision not been there. So it all sort of starts from someone's dream or someone's vision.
Yeah.
And that is also somehow based on discontent. Why can't we do that? Why can't we buy that? Why do we have to be constrained by what is? Why can't we have access to what might be? And
why does it have to look like this? Yeah,
Yeah.
Why does something have to look like this?
Yeah.
And I think,
Yeah, no, exactly. I remember, a long, long time ago, I saw the front cover of a magazine called Industrial Design. It was a rather boring American magazine. But this particular issue, on the front cover, it said, "Why can't a telephone look like a banana?" And I was very struck by this. I mean, I don't see much point in a telephone looking like a banana, but it felt like an open door. It felt like, yeah, it could look like a banana, but then it could look like a monkey puzzle tree. It couldn't do anything. And it kind of, I think in any spirit of creativity in anybody, there has to be an opening of doors and a looking out into nothing. And it's quite frightening.
it is very frightening. I mean, that approach, I think, there's something I've heard you talk about a few times, and I wondered if we could revisit it again. Is this idea of the 4 rooms, or the small house, 2 up, 2 down house, that is sort of something that you, looking back, has been the process through which you've thought about being creative. I wonder if you could relive it for us again.
Well, yes. Oh God, it's a terrible admission, but I kind of started, I think, by appreciating the people I considered to be heroic, the heroes, the people whose work, for some reason, and I can't explain easily what the reason was, but it would be, got the amazing finesse in this work, or the colorfulness in this work, or the wit in this work, or the humor, or the whatever the qualities were. I saw qualities in the work of other people that resonated with me and that I admired. And so the first room, if you like, that I went into, I called the room of great work. It was where there were people producing things that made me feel a mixture of, I'd love to be able to do that, or I can't possibly ever do that. It was sort of a room of challenge in a way, but it was also, it steered me in the wrong direction because I started to imitate the work that I admired. And I found myself looking for the qualities of somebody's work in my work. And I'd never heard the word, what is the word? Let me try and remember. Oh, I can't remember it. Never mind. When you do work that actually emulates what somebody else has done. And somebody pointed out to me that I was doing imitation work. And it was an absolute, like, an extraordinary breakthrough for me, because I realized that it was true. And I didn't know what my work would be like. So it was quite a strange time for me. And then I met Wally Olins, who was a master of reason. And I suppose I was a master of unreasonableness, because I wasn't reasonable. I mean, my whole upbringing was unreasonable in so many ways. I realized I was an unreasonable person because I was rebellious and always in trouble and always being beaten up and punished and all that kind of stuff for being nonconformist, I suppose, wanting to be different. And so I thought, well, I'm not going into the room of great work anymore because I'm fed up with being a parody of other people. And now here's Wally, with whom I worked very happily for many, many years, who had a brain, an analytical brain, and a way of patiently getting to the point of really looking at things and really understanding things, where I was a bit of a skater. You know, I was sort of skating around on ice, but we worked very well together. And then I think I realized there was another room, not dissimilar from the first one, which I would call the room of precedent, which was, I've done something, it's worked really well, so I'll do it again, only it'll have a false moustache and a pair of glasses so people won't recognize it. But it was like, I know how to do stuff. And that became a kind of prison in a way. You know, you were constrained by the confidence that I had by knowing what to do, and the fear I had of the idea of not knowing what to do. And it was only when I recognized that I was capable of doing work from a core of not knowing what to do. And then what happened was I kind of knew, oh, that's what creativity is. That's what it is. It's not knowing what to do and waiting for something in you that is intangible to suddenly be there for you. So it's like gifts that came, but you can only access them by letting go of what you know, or letting go of who you think you should be, or letting go of all those sort of presumptions. And I found myself able to do that, and things were born. I thought, my God, this is absolutely amazing. I'm not doing anything. I'm waiting for something to happen. And in a way, it's not work. And I shouldn't really be paid for it because it just happens. And then, of course, you realize, I think most people do, that we're very much alike and very much like other people. You know, the idea of being very different from other people is a bit of a fantasy.
Yeah.
We have enormous similarities. Like you and I, Joe, have a lot in common. A lot of things that we find, that we would find, that we share. And so it's that ability to trust your humanity and yet allow things to be created. And I think most people have that. You know, some people have it to extreme and they become famous artists or famous concert pianists, but I think everybody has it to some degree. You know, when they choose a shirt or when they choose to feel a certain way, that's a creative act. And I think people are doing it all day long, actually. So I have a huge faith in the creativity of other people. And in my working life, I've had that proven to me time and time and time again, that people come in and they start collaborating with you and they start flourishing. It's wonderful.
Yeah, it's so interesting. I mean, having been to art school myself, that process is so similar across the different creative approaches that actually, whilst you go through these different stages of realizing, and I was never good at the end bit. Well, I was in some ways, in a particular way that I've now ended up sort of working with institutions and developing how they think and breathe and want to move forward. But in terms of the actual producing artwork, and it was really liberating to think, actually, I'm not the person that's going to sit in the studio against a wall and make work. You know, that's not me. I'm about going to talk to people and doing things collaboratively. And I respect hugely what artists do. And I think it's one of the hardest things actually you could do. People talk about it not being, but it's actually one of the hardest things. And then to put yourself out there as an individual. But to hear that process sort of articulated, it's not something I've ever thought about in that linear way, but it absolutely works like that. And those little moments of realization when you think.
And in a way, you know, it's a strange metaphor in a way. You're turning a client's company into an orchestra. You're kind of showing them that their potential for self-expression in whatever place they are in an organization, they have enormous potential. You know, amazing, you know, in some big companies, that people can make choices and produce things. I don't know, you know, when you go into a supermarket and you find real innovation in some of the products that weren't there yesterday and are suddenly there, and they're delightful, and somebody has worked on producing something that delights people. What a fantastic achievement.
It is, and actually that's the bit that brings joy as well, isn't it? I
Yeah.
know we've done a successful exhibition, and there's the people tell me how it affects them, or
Yeah.
how brilliant it made them feel. I
Yeah.
mean, that feeling back as well is incredible.
Yeah.
And it's awful to push something that you don't really fully believe in, and I think that's where creativity sort of really gets to, doesn't it? Actually, something that you feel yourself that you can connect with.
But it's in so many fields. I mean, I remember seeing the Manilo Blahnik shoe exhibition in the design museum, the previous design museum, and looking at his shoes and seeing so much creativity and imagination and enjoyment and spirit expressing itself in shoes and boots, and you just think, my God, that's so wonderful. But then you see a fishmonger who enjoys the display of fish every day, goes to Kingsgate and produces this wonderful, wonderful display of fish. And there's so much creativity in life and in how people choose to do things that you only have to go somewhere where you haven't been before, and then you start to notice it. It's wonderful.
Absolutely. And I think actually in some ways, a lot of institutions, cultural institutions I'm talking about now, are starting to wake up to this idea as well, that absolutely, everybody is being creative in lots of different ways. And how can we support that in every sense? I mean, just quickly on the pandemic and creativity. I mean, I don't know what you've noticed. It'd be good to hear about how, for me, it's become, I think a lot of people have realized that it was missing in what they do, and actually it's come a little bit to the fore in this period of lockdown. People have I've watched people do two things. One is discover where they actually live, which has been something. They can walk around streets they've never walked around, and then it's do something creative, because they realize you need that outlet. And if you're not going to work and you're not doing this, that, and the other, those little bits of creativity you're talking about, you're not doing in your daily life. And it affects you.
Even in the creativity of appreciation and watching a TV program and seeing it more thoroughly than you did before, or noticing more in it. You don't think, oh, I'm appreciating the direction, or I'm appreciating the who's done the wardrobe and selected the clothes. You don't think of all the detailed bits of creative jigsaw puzzles that come together to make a production, but they are extraordinary. And I think when you watch films more than you did, or you watch TV programs more than you did, or you read books more than you did, or listen to music more than you did, you realize the breadth of enrichment and the amount of creativity that goes into so many human expressions. It's a joy. It's wonderful.
And do you think it's changed your approach at all during this period, this year of being in different places and not being able to go out and do things? And
well, I don't know whether it's that or getting older, but one of them is doing it. I mean, yeah, I've moved into the country away from London for a while, and that has had a most amazing effect on me. I mean, watching a heron flying like a 747. I mean, it has the same majesty as a 747, or watching a red kite, which is more like a Spitfire. They just seeing more metaphor, seeing more similarity, and seeing, I just think seeing more thoroughly than one normally does. I found during this time. I'm much more conscious of the details of life, I think.
do you, I mean, I think that certainly I share that view, and I think a lot of people I've spoken to us in the same way. Do you think it'll change us this period as people?
I don't think it'll go back. No. I think it'll move on.
I hope it doesn't.
How it'll move on, who knows? How it will move on. But it's in a way a huge creative challenge. Like, do we want to go on as we were before? And it does feel like we were before. There was something before this. So that makes one conscious that there are different stages, different ways of being, and we're in a different one now from the one we were in before COVID. So what do we want to do next? Do we want to go back? I don't think we want to go back. I think we have an opportunity to move on. We all know there are things happening, political things, social things happening that we wish were not like that. I think we will see a burst of creativity, absolutely, from almost universal burst of creativity when this pandemic declines. I'm very optimistic about it.
I mean, I do too. I'm trying to think about this period as a bit of a blank sheet of paper moment, actually.
Yes.
And everybody frustrates me when they say, how are we going to get back to normal? And you think, oh God, please, no. Actually, can't we see this as an opportunity? I mean, I know you embrace the word challenge.
Yes.
You embrace this idea of challenges as part of being creative.
Yes.
But all we hear about now are challenges. So how do you think people entering the creative sort of sector now, how important should they see challenges and think about the opportunities of a challenge?
It's a really good question. It's a really good question. I don't know. I think that when people see the potential for change, which this pandemic has shown us, that we can't go on dying, we can't go on having more and more sickness and more illness and eventually disappearing as a species, which is the final outcome of a pandemic, is there aren't any more people anymore, it's gone. So since we're now given a new opportunity to conduct our lives in the way that we choose to, I think we will become more intolerant of what didn't work and more open to ways of being and living and seeing that are less familiar to us. I don't think we're going to just go back and be the same as when we were, but we'll see. It's exciting.
Yeah, it is. I mean, I think I was trying to, I mean, I know there's been a great hardship over this period, but actually to see this opportunity, you rarely as a community, as a society, get an opportunity to think, right, what didn't work, what did work, how do we move forward, and all those bits about how we do things badly politically and everything. Does actually, how can we think about this moment as what do we want to live in? I suppose it's your thing about, why does it have to look like a phone? Why can't it look like a banana?
Yeah, I think probably one of the most dramatic aspects of that, particularly for men and offices, is why the hell is the office like that? What is the choreography and the scenery of an office? What is all that? You know, why does the carpet get thicker and thicker as you go up more higher up in the office and you get more and more senior people? I mean, there are all these little nuances of hierarchy of all sorts that go on in business. I think those have always been questionable, but I think they're now more universally questionable because there's a lot of pleasure in working at home. And then you think, well, my home isn't supporting me, because you were only there in the evening and sleeping there and getting up in the morning and having a breakfast, and then out you go again, and then you spend the day in some terrible office. So what are we doing? I think it's a terrific time to review the nature of work, the nature of relationship, the nature of organizations, and the nature of how we mold our future, how we create it. So it's a great time. It's very sad that so many people are ill and so many people have lost their lives. Of course, that's terrible. That is terrible. But on the other hand, we have this opportunity of remaking how we want to be.
I couldn't agree more. And one question I wanted to ask you, I know you're very, as you've talked about nature and the environment, and that's the other big crisis that we face in time with the pandemic. And Brexit and all those things that are affecting us around that. How do you think those things will change the way we consume and relate to big business as well, relate to those bigger brands that we mentioned earlier on, that you've worked with a lot of them?
Oh, look, if I knew, I would be a very rich and successful man. I think the thing of not knowing what to do is reflected in every aspect of our lives. You know, when you go into a hospital and you see things that could work better. Well, you go to anywhere, if you've got some imagination, which most people have, every day there are things that you see. It doesn't have to be like that. Why is it like that? I mean, I even feel, you know, why have I got, what are socks all about? Putting on my socks in the morning, how strange in some ways our clothes are. And when you look at a period drama and you see the kind of clothes people used to wear, and you think, well, thank God I don't have to look like that. But then I don't have to look like this either. So, so I mean, we all have this sense of potential, this sense of how it could be different in so many aspects of our lives, how we eat, how we relate to each other as people, how we relate to each other as nations. It's all a fantastic challenge, and it's full of rich possibilities. Well, I think.
How do we get creative people to be part of those decisions? That's the big challenge, isn't it? That's probably not a question, more of a statement, isn't it? But you know, how do we get artists and musicians and writers to be part of the decision making? Because I think that's a big issue, isn't it?
I agree. Or how can we get what it is in painters and musicians in more people? You know, how we can get more expressive potential in people, which then throws up, well, how are we educating ourselves? You know, when I think of, I can't remember the name, is it Montessori, those schools? Well, somebody told me that one of the things that can happen there is that you can spend a day celebrating a color.
Yeah, that's
Well,
amazing.
I never did that. I mean, I do that naturally. I become more appreciative of color as I grow older, but I wish I wish the door of how to appreciate color was an exercise that I was offered all the way through my education. I wish there was less curriculum and more, I can't find the word, more firing creativity in so many directions as we become educated. Somehow education is topping you up with experience, other people's history, stuff, rather than lighting flames of your own creativity to create the future for yourself and for the people with whom you live.
I mean, what frustrates me about the curriculum is that it hasn't changed in over 100 years.
No.
You know, we're actually teaching the same things that we taught over
Yeah.
100 years ago. And if you think about what's happened in that period, it's enormous change to us as a group of people. So, I mean, yeah, I would scrap the curriculum and start again, really. Start with a fresh sheet of paper. And then think about how creativity is not simply just doing art and music on the side, but actually it's integral to all of learning about everything, about living, about existing, about growing, and absolutely.
Yes.
One of the things we're only just waking up to is the digital. And I did want to ask you about what your thoughts are, because I mean, you talk a lot about someone's interaction with a moment or a conversation that makes up a business. I mean, we're actually refreshing our website as a gallery now, and it's such an interesting exercise because it's sort of, what do we do in a digital space? How do we get across the warmth, get across the welcome? How do we ground ourselves in where we are? You know, what do you think about that design and branding in a digital space?
I think the potential is enormous. And I think one of the problems with potential is that it scares people. And it's frightening to open doors and windows and go out and do things differently. I mean, I even remember my first experience of sitting on the back of a horse and how frightening that was. And in fact, this horse knew how to scrape me off its back by walking under a tree.
It happened to me.
And so, I mean, I think it's partly to do with accepting fear and allowing fear to be a natural aspect of creativity. That opening doors of fear into more liberty than you allow yourself to have. I mean, if you've put me now in front of 25 tubes of paint and a big canvas, my first feeling would be one of fear. I'm being asked to expose myself in some way. It's not a natural feeling of delight and playfulness. It's I'm going to be exposing my inadequacy to other people because I've been taught, or I've allowed myself to develop a sense of inadequacy compared to other people in some respects, which was motivating me to find my adequacy, which I was able to do as a creative designer. But it's almost like you have to go through some process of granting yourself permission to stand out, because any creative idea stands out. And it's that, you know, to an ordinary man, if you put on a different color tie, and I'm an ordinary man, if you put on a different color tie, you do feel something.
Yeah.
And you do feel that maybe somebody noticed that you got a pink tie on and make a little judgment of you in some respects. And I don't know, I think creativity is to a large extent the conquering of presets of fear, of assumptions that the world is somehow judging you or even hostile to you, or that you're on trial in some way, whereas in fact you have absolute freedom to create.
It's funny,
and you don't feel it.
With the website development, they said, do you want a sort of off the peg, you know, sort of set things? That absolutely not.
No.
That's the absolute last thing that we want to do,
Yeah.
is to think about. I mean, it's so interesting actually, having sort of worked in this field for a while now and thinking how frequently galleries sort of rebrand and re-identity themselves. And we were talking earlier about the history of the term brand.
Yes.
And it's just literally taking a hot iron and stabbing it into the back of a cow's backside.
Well, it's done I mean, it started off with burning marks in cows' butts, you know, so that if somebody stole your cow, you could find it again because it had your mark on its butt and not somebody else's. And then it sort of moved into, you know, my name is on what I make. So it's called the Ford car because I, Henry Ford, created it. And that still exists in the fashion business to quite an extent. But it's sort of emasculated in big organizations, which is why some of them struggle to find it again, which we call, in my view, that's what branding is about. It's a refining and redefining why you're there. What's the point of view? And how do you articulate the point of view through everything you do and through how you look, so that people can see? I mean, you look at an iPhone and you see the point of Apple. You can feel it. And that sort of articulacy isn't felt vital to lots of organizations because they simply haven't woken up to it. But as you said earlier, you felt something about both IKEA and Apple because they're so expressive. They're so themselves.
You just got to gravitate towards them. I mean, it's interesting. If somebody once said to me when I worked in Essex, and it was about the library that they were going to move or shut down, I think. And this person said, I never go in there, but every time I walk past it, I get a warm feeling and I'm glad it's there.
Yes.
It was really nice to hear that. I mean, it was sort of, I don't go in, I'll admit I don't go in there. I don't use it, but I want it to be there.
Yes, that's exactly right. Yeah. I
And
think
it's similar.
gives you that feeling as you walk around the city.
Yeah.
You're glad it's there. And don't even know what it is.
And that erosion of public space, everything's become commercialized, hasn't it? You know, you go into a shopping center now or a library and the security people are wearing sort of ties and suits rather than those sort of holy jumpers they used to wear. You know, it's actually, you know, so everything's become sort of commercialized in a way, and I think that's quite a sort of worrying direction to go to. But in my line of work, the one thing that I've always think about you is people always ask me what to call something. You know, we're constantly coming, like this series, you know, we had a long chat, what should we call this talk series? And somebody said, you know, there's this great music label in Sheffield, reggae music label that was called Talking Loud in the 70s. And we said, well, let's just call it that, you know. And then there was a big debate, can we actually call it Talking, IN without a G, or not? Because the original one was Talking without a G, and then it was like, well, we better add the G on or else we're going to get complaints. But you know, I'm constantly asked what to call something, and I've realized, you know, and I remember you think about this, is it doesn't matter actually. I mean, it does matter, but it doesn't. It's what you do with it, and that's where. And if you look at names, they're terrible. Names are genuinely terrible. You know, but if they do something good, then it builds a brand, doesn't it?
Absolutely. But you know, when you're going to go back to your youth, and I remember boxes that had pram wheels put on them that you could jump in, and I and a friend of mine put two sets of pram wheels on a box on Primrose Hill. And of course, we had no idea of the speed at which we were going to go. And we bumped into some little boy's elbow, and it was a complete catastrophe. And I had to learn the word apologize, because I had to go into this little kid's family, into his house, and apologize for what we'd done. And that's how I learned the word apologize, which I've never really forgotten. But I mean, the feeling of putting those wheels on the box, it wasn't really a creative thing. It was a conformist. It was like, I want to be like those kids who go in boxes with wheels on. and even when I think of myself looking in the mirror, probably at the age of 12, and worrying about which side of my head the parting should be, my hair. And one's, I don't know when it happens, one's consciousness of one's appearance in relation to other people's appearance, and what things about oneself makes one feel bad. You know, oh God, I'm never going to be tall enough, or I wish I was a blonde, or I wish I had big muscles, or whatever it may be. You are sort of already in the zone of choice, and hopefully choosing how you are rather than choosing how somebody else is and wishing it were like that, which is what a lot of companies do, by the way.
Yeah.
It's the same thing. I wish we weren't like this. I wish we were like them. I wish we were like Sony, you know, because, and we're never going to be like Sony. And you think, well, why not? Why are you putting these constraints on yourself? Why can't you be like Sony? You know?
So is the myth true that you spent a long period just wearing boiler suits? Is that
I did about 7 years.
7 years.
And it was wonderful. Actually, you know, in fact, it's really funny you should raise that, because I was thinking about that the other day. The most wonderful thing about that was sitting in a toilet, public toilet, and having to be completely naked in order to take a crap. And you'd sit in this public space naked. And that was a most extraordinarily eccentric feeling. And I sort of thought, I don't think this is quite right. I'm not sure I should be doing this. But then I managed to restore my faith in the wonderful simplicity of shoving something in the washing machine, drying it, and putting it straight on. Yeah. I mean, it was the whole business of choosing clothes disappeared. For a few years, I had navy blue ones, royal blue ones, khaki ones, and white ones I occasionally wore in the summer. They were beautiful.
I think we should all do that. I think it'd be great if we all just went to boil. I think it's a really good idea. We do have a few questions that people have sent in that I just wanted to run past you, because it's great that people have taken the time to.
Yes, exactly.
So this one is, and this is something we had a little chat about earlier, is what is the key lessons that placemaking can learn from branding?
What's placemaking?
Well, I think that was a great question when you asked it, because it's something that we are sort of grappling with. I think as all of us really, this terminology of, I mean, it's almost like, I think it's branding for an area, a town, or a, you know, it's thinking about how the whole town takes on an identity and a distinctiveness, I suppose.
Yes.
I mean, I think
That sense of placemaking, yes.
yeah. So how does it become develop a distinctive nature that becomes interesting to businesses to move here, people to live? I think being in a coastal town, we're constantly thinking about that as the
Yes.
process of that industry of visitors coming to a coastal town has changed. You know, it was in the boom times in the early part of the 20th century. Went into serious decline through the post-war period as people travelled abroad, and then now it's having a bit of a resurgence.
Yes.
Coming to seaside towns.
Yes. And what is the opportunity for more diverse creativity to make them even more attractive? Yeah. What's the question?
What are the key lessons that placemaking can learn from branding?
Yes, that's a really interesting and very serious question, actually. Very serious question, because branding starts from choosing how to behave before you start to choose how that behavior should look. It's how to behave. So, you know, how a company culture evolves is more important than how things in the company look. And how the culture evolves kind of brings forth ideas of appearance which are relevant to exposing its behavior to more people. You know, so that, for example, if you go into a company and the reception is extremely formal, and you have to write your name and sign your signature, that tells you something. It may not be correct, but it'll tell you a sense of, this is a bureaucratic place, and this is probably a hierarchical place, and all those sort of things. I'm going to tell you a story, actually. It's just come into my mind. I used to work for a company called 3i, and they had a really interesting CEO, a very, very intelligent and sensitive and full human being. And I asked him, I remember this question. I said, John, what happens when people come and see you? And he said, well, what do you mean? And I said, well, what happens when people come and see you? He said, you mean visitors? I said, well, yes. Anybody who wants to come and see you and they arrive, they have quite a battle with your revolving door. I don't know if you realize how heavy it is. And your reception area, you know, you see a head and shoulders of a young lady behind a huge slab. But what do you feel about people coming to see you? He said, well, I mean, I don't have anything to do with people coming. You know, I send Elizabeth down to get them. So I said, okay. And does she walk in front of them, behind them, or beside them as they walk from the furniture towards the elevator? He said, I've got no idea. So I said, well, look, it's interesting, John. Let me have a little game with you. Let's go to your door and walk to your desk with me in front of you, again with me behind you, and then with me beside you. And he was a very, very bright guy. And he said, let's do it. So we did it. So which feels better? So he said, well, I didn't like walking behind you because I was sort of painting little caricatures of you from behind. And I felt exposed walking in front of you because you would be looking at me and judging my haircut or whatever it is from behind. So walking beside you was much better than either walking in front or behind. Well, okay, so could you tell Elizabeth to walk beside people? Well, do you know what she does anyway? I couldn't possibly talk to her about anything like that. I mean, it's ridiculous. She just does it the way she does it. I've got no idea. So I said, well, how many visitors do you have a day? And he said, well, I mean, sometimes none, sometimes maybe, well, maybe 2 in the morning, maybe 1 in the afternoon. I mean, never more than 3 people. So I said, John, why don't you go down and meet them yourself? Oh, he said, why are you suggesting that? And I said, well, I found if I visit a company and I've come to see the CEO, and if he or she comes down to meet me in reception, it is a very special and very almost intimate feeling. It feels really good.
Yeah.
So he said, well, I'll give it a go. I worked with him for many years. We did some quite interesting things together, and that transformed his business life.
Mm.
He just felt, I am representing my company. I'm not sitting in the ivory tower. I'm going down to meet people who've expressed the courtesy or the desire to come and see me. I'm going to meet them at the door, like at home. I'm not going to get somebody else to open the front door and bring them into my living room where I'm sitting waiting for them. And so just that little aspect of how people are received into a company, both in terms of how the architecture works or the interior design works, but more in terms of what is the choreography, how is the behavior, what does it feel like,
Yeah.
and why do I feel intimidated visiting this company?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we need to get you to think about Zoom etiquette then, don't we? In the future of how we're all communicating in these funny platforms. It's changed the way that we behave, and actually everybody needs to think about it. You know, how I mean, I love when people, you can see they're washing in the background or whatever. They've got, there's a bit of their life is visible
Yeah.
in the sort of
Well, absolutely.
background.
Absolutely.
And you
And
sort
I
of,
think that the
it
fewer,
rehumanizes people, doesn't it? It rehumanizes people.
the fewer layers of disguise or layers of adaptation that we have to make in order to fit our idea of what's right. You know, I'm an important person in this company, therefore I should be on the top of the hill, or it should be difficult to come and see me, or my office should be so huge that it's, you know, that it's 1/4 mile from the door to where I am. I mean, all those cliches, an aspect of creativity is questioning what is. It's
the CEO on the reception desk.
Yeah. Well, funny enough, there was an advertising agency in Germany called, I've forgotten its name, but its creative director swapped job with the receptionist for 3 days. And she had to take creative decisions and he had to greet people that came into the door. And he said it was a marvelous experience, really enjoyable for both of them. So I thought, well, that's pretty good.
Absolutely. So yeah, well, Michael, we're coming up to an hour, so that was,
Oh
you
my
know,
God.
I know, absolutely, an absolute pleasure to be able to sort of talk to you about these things, and I'm sure we could go on and on.
Me too. Yeah.
And talk. And one of the horrible things about the behavior of Zoom is when we close this down, it just vanishes. So I will be giving you a call afterwards to say thank you as well. But
really, I'm going to tell you a tiny, quick little story. I was 22. It was my first design job working for a company that was part of an advertising agency. And I was commissioned to design an exhibition to show shell plastics in products at work. Fascinating. And the chairman of Shell arrived and he asked to meet the designer, so he met me. So he said, yes, what do you think? What do you think of Shell? And I said, what do you mean, or something? Well, he said, what do you think about the shell? And I very quickly had to think of something. So I said, well, why do you write the word shell on something that's obviously a shell? So he said, you mean it's visual tautology? So I vaguely knew what the word tautology meant. So I said, yes. So he said, that's really, really interesting. Let me ask you a question, he said. How long do you think, if I agreed with you that the word shell should come off the shell, how long do you think it would take for me to achieve that in a company the size of Shell? And I was a naive designer. I said, I have no bloody idea. I don't know. Why can't you just say it should happen and it would happen the next day? He said it will take 5 years. It will take 5 years. And here's the extraordinary thing. About 5 years after I had that conversation, Raymond Loewy's company took the lettering Shell off the shell. It's now been off the shell since then, but it took that amount of time. And now, of course, you see this, the Shell symbol, it doesn't say Shell on it, but it's extraordinary how these kind of decisions, which you should think would take a day in a large company, it's another story altogether.
Absolutely, absolutely. Well, thank you so much, Michael, for taking the
No,
time.
come on, it was a pleasure.
And just to say to everyone watching that there will be more Talking Loud events over the next few weeks. And if you go to either the Towner Eastbourne website or the Delaware Pavilion website, there's details of up and coming talks with some really interesting speakers and things as well. But thank you for joining today. And thank you to Sue as well for fantastic BSL interpretation.
Yes, thank you. Thank you. And thank you for inviting me, and thank you for tolerating me.
No, it's so we'll say goodbye, and thank you very much, everyone, for joining. Bye-bye.
Okay. Bye-bye, Joe. Bye-bye, everybody. And thank you.